The 1st of July, 1916, 7:30 in the morning. A whistle blows along a 6-mile front in northern France. Hundreds of young men from a single English city climb out of the trenches and walk slowly into machine gun fire. They are the Birmingham pals, friends, neighbors, brothers, recruited from the same streets, the same factories, the same pubs. The rifles in their hands are Lee Enfields. The light machine guns advancing beside them are Lewis guns. Both were forged in a single neighborhood of a single English city, most of them by women, many of them by the wives, the sisters, and the mothers of the men now dying with their own city's steel still warm in their grip. Within 4 months, almost 800 men of the Birmingham Pals will be dead in the French mud. The factory back home will not stop for one shift.
I'm Arthur, and today we're reconstructing the city that built the British Empire.
And then quietly devoured its own people. A red brick metropolis that doubled in 30 years, declared itself the best governed city in the world, and forgot to mention the 108,000 toxic houses where its workers slept under the same yellow smoke that built that empire. This is the story of Birmingham, the city of 1,000 trades, and the price every one of them cost.
To understand Birmingham in 1900, you don't compare it to London.
You compare it to a living organism that ate everything around it. In 1891, the city held 478,000 people. 30 years later, in 1921, it held 919,000. Birmingham almost doubled in a single working lifetime. The most extraordinary jump came in a single year. In 1911, the city executed the largest municipal annexation in British history. Many independent towns with their own histories were swallowed in a single act of Parliament. The city's surface multiplied overnight to more than 80 square miles. What absorbed all those people was a forest of red brick that turned black under industrial smoke within months of being built. By 1920, Birmingham contained around 108,000 back-to-back houses, terraced dwellings with no cross ventilation, and shared yard toilets serving 20 or 30 families. To put that in scale, there were more toxic dwellings packed into Birmingham in 1920 than there are total homes today in the entire London borough of Camden. The smoke above all of this was not the romantic gray fog of London literature. Birmingham burned cheap, sulfurous coal in hundreds of thousands of chimneys, and the result was a yellow-brown chemical fog that stung the lungs and turned daylight orange. The wind decided who breathed what. Prevailing southwesterlies pushed the smoke toward the east and the north. Edgbaston, the leafy suburb to the southwest, became the kingdom of the bourgeoisie. Others became labyrinths of soot and lung disease. A guy born in Edgbaston could expect to live nearly 15 years longer than a child born 3 miles away. In one of those yards in 1895, a widowed jewelry polisher named Sarah Jenkins lived in a single-room back-to-back with 5 children. She earned 9 shillings a week, walking 40 minutes through the yellow fog. Her court shared 1 cold water tap and 1 earth toilet between 24 families. As the new electric trams rumbled past each evening, Sarah waited for the city's promised reform to reach her yard. It would not. But in 1900, one man was determined to turn this monster into the laboratory of the modern world.
His name was Joseph Chamberlain.
By 1900, Chamberlain had already done something no British politician had attempted before. As mayor of Birmingham in the 1870s, he had taken the gas company, the water company, the sewer system, and the electrical grid out of private hands and placed them under the city council. He called it the civic gospel, the kingdom of God built on earth in red brick, with clean water and gas lamps. The municipalized gas operation alone fed enormous profits back into libraries, baths, and parks, instead of into shareholder pockets. In 1879, the city completed its civic cathedral, the Council House on Victoria Square, a monumental Renaissance building with a council chamber designed to dwarf the citizen and glorify the corporation. Then came the surgical strike on the city's poor. Corporation Street, Chamberlain's Birmingham houseman, was driven through the medieval slums in a wide commercial boulevard. 850 homes demolished, thousands of families displaced with no replacement housing. The justification was sanitation. The outcome was real estate. Shops and hotels rose for the bourgeoisie, while the displaced piled into already crowded back-to-backs, 3 to a room where there had been 2. But Chamberlain's masterpiece was the Avon Valley Aqueduct. Birmingham had no clean local supply, so the city built 118 kilometers of underground pipes from the mountains of mid-Wales to the Midlands. King Edward VII personally inaugurated the system in 1904. Consider the irony. The most polluted city in the British Empire was now drinking the cleanest water on the British mainland, while the families 3 streets from the council house still queued at a shared yard tap and breathed yellow smoke. The civic gospel could move a river. It could not move the smoke from the lungs of the people it was meant to save. Outside the city, George Cadbury was building his own paternalist version, Bourneville, the Quaker garden village. Wider streets, gardens, fruit trees, no alcohol, compulsory gardening. A worker who could be saved, provided he surrendered his free will at the gate. In July of 1906, the architect collapsed. 3 days after celebrating his 70th birthday with imperial pageantry, Joseph Chamberlain suffered a massive stroke in his bathroom. They found him on the tiled floor, paralyzed, his mind almost untouched, his body broken forever. He lived another 8 years, watching from his window as Europe drifted toward the war that would test everything he had built. But while Chamberlain raised his cathedral, thousands of workshops were already building a different machine, one that, under the right pressure, could arm an empire.
Manchester had cotton. Sheffield had steel. Birmingham had everything.
Industrial historians call it the city of 1,000 trades, and the phrase is almost 2 centuries old. Unlike its rivals, Birmingham was not built around a single product. It was an interlocking web of workshops producing brass fittings, gold chains, pen nibs, gun barrels, buttons, bicycles, jewelry, and chocolate. Around 1900, the Board of Trade counted at least 10 major industrial sectors operating side by side, none dominant. The crown jewel was the Jewellery Quarter, a 265-acre warren of small workshops in Hockley. At its peak before the First World War, it employed somewhere between 50 and 70,000 skilled craftsmen and produced more than half of all jewelry made in the entire British Empire. The streets, lit by gas lamps even in the morning because of the smog, were so saturated with precious metal that workshop owners swept the wooden floors at the end of every day, washed the workers' hands in metal recovery tanks, and pulled gold dust out of the drainage. Nothing was wasted. A few miles east, in Small Heath, the Birmingham Small Arms Company, the BSA, sprawled across 26 acres. It produced military rifles, sporting guns, and the bicycles that workers across the empire pedaled to work. South of the city, in Bourneville, Cadbury employed thousands of mostly young women in white uniformed lines making chocolate that was shipped from Calcutta to Cape Town. Three faces of the same machine. What is rarely remembered is that Birmingham had been arming Britain for centuries. By the time the Boer War broke out in 1999, Lee Metford and early Lee Enfield rifles were rolling out of Small Heath in such volume that the British Army had a continuous Birmingham supply line into South Africa. This was the machine that the 20th century would test. It did not need to be retooled when the next war came. It only needed to be told to run faster, longer, and without sleep. But before the war turned everything inward, most Birmingham workers lived a different life. A life of pubs, football, and flickering cinema screens, anchored against the relentless soot.
In 1900, Birmingham had over 1,200 licensed public houses.
In some working-class districts, the density was one pub for every 200 or 300 people. The pub was not just a bar. It was the only warm room in winter, the labor exchange where foremen recruited at 6 in the morning, the bookmaker's office, and the parlor that the back-to-back houses simply did not have. A pint of dark mild cost 2 or 3 pennies. It was, the Quakers complained, the cheapest anesthetic in the British Empire. The food was almost as defining. Faggots and peas, a savory pudding made from the parts of the pig the rich threw away, pork liver, lungs, breadcrumbs, sage, all wrapped in the membrane of the pig's stomach and baked in gravy. A working family could buy 6 faggots for a few pennies on a Friday evening. It tasted of fat, salt, and the kind of dignity you can buy when you have run out of money. The football was a religion. Aston Villa, founded in 1874, won the FA Cup in 1895 and 1897 in front of crowds of 20,000 to 30,000 at Villa Park. For the price of 6 pence, a foundryman could spend Saturday afternoon among 10,000 other men of his class and forget for 90 minutes the exact decibel level of his own factory floor. And then, on the 27th of December 1909, something genuinely new opened on Station Street, the Electric Cinema. 376 red velvet seats, Birmingham's first permanent cinema. More than a century later, it is still the oldest continuously operating cinema in Britain. For a few pennies, a soot-blackened laborer who would never see the sea or another country could sit in the dark and watch the pyramids, the northern lights, the trenches of France, all flickering on a white wall, while a piano played live beside the screen. The world came to Birmingham through a beam of light. That was the day, but at night, in the alleys of Small Heath and Cheapside, other footsteps echoed, and the truth of who was making them was nothing like the legend the 21st century would invent about them.
The first time the name appears in print is the 24th of March, 1890.
The Birmingham Mail reports an assault at the Rainbow Public House on Adderley Street. A young teetotaler named George Eastwood is beaten unconscious by what the paper calls a gang known as the Peaky Blinders. The weapon was not a razor blade, it was a heavy belt buckle. For the next 20 years, the Peaky Blinders were not a mafia, they were poor teenage boys from Small Heath and Cheapside. They mugged shopkeepers, stole bicycles, and fought rival gangs over street corners. The names we know: Thomas Gilbert, who used the alias Kevin Mooney; Harry Fowles, Babyface Harry; Thomas Mucklow, sentenced to 6 months hard labor for slashing a fellow gang member with a belt, were boys from the slums. They had belt buckles and bad luck. The razor blades sewn into flat caps were a myth. In the 1890s, safety razor blades were a luxury the poor could not afford, and a thin blade sewn to soft cloth cannot cut anything. The legend was invented decades later by a novel and immortalized by a BBC television series. The real signature of the Peaky Blinders was their clothing: bell-bottom trousers, hobnailed boots, brass-buttoned jackets, silk neck scarves, and a long fringe slicked sideways across one eye. Dandies in a world that wanted them dead. What killed them was the police. In 1899, a former district inspector of the Royal Irish Constabulary named Charles Houghton Rafter became chief constable of Birmingham. He brought paramilitary methods to the Midlands. The interview question for new recruits was famously direct: can you read, can you write, can you fight? Rafter ran the force for 36 years and crushed the Peaky Blinder street gangs out of existence by around 1910. By the time the BBC drama is set in the 1920s, the original Peaky Blinders no longer existed. The truth Hollywood never told you is this: the real violence of Birmingham was not in its alleys. It was inside Winson Green Prison, and it was directed by the British state at women. On the 17th of September 1909, during a visit by Prime Minister Asquith, 9 suffragettes were arrested for breaking windows in protest. Among them was a working-class militant named Mary Lee. They were sent to Winson Green Prison. On the 22nd of September, Lee began a hunger strike. On the 25th, the prison medical officer, acting under orders from the Home Office, performed the first systematic forcible feeding of a political prisoner anywhere in England. They strapped her to a chair. They forced a rubber tube down her throat. They poured liquid into her stomach to break her hunger strike before she became a martyr. 5 years later, when another Birmingham suffragette named Bertha Ryland slashed a painting in the city's art gallery, she went to the same prison and faced the same tube. The most liberal democracy on earth had built an industrial torture system inside its own model city to break women asking to vote. Street violence was the myth. The real violence was about to begin, in Flanders. And Birmingham was about to arm its own sons with its own hands.
On the 4th of August, 1914, Britain declared war on Germany.
Within 3 weeks, 3,000 Birmingham men had volunteered together for the Birmingham Pals, the 14th, 15th, and 16th Battalions of the Royal Warwickshire Regiment. The city pivoted in days. The BSA on Small Heath threw its lines into permanent overdrive, 3 shifts, 24 hours a day. By the end of the war, the BSA alone had produced 1.5 million Lee-Enfield rifles and 145,397 Lewis light machine guns. To put those numbers in scale, that is 1 Lee-Enfield rifle for every man Britain sent to the Battle of the Somme, and 400,000 more besides. At its 1916 peak, the factory employed 14,000 workers, most of them women, the so-called munitionettes, whose skin turned yellow from handling TNT, who took home 30 shillings a week. To the south, in Longbridge, Herbert Austin's Austin Motor Company stopped making cars and started making aircraft, ammunition cases, and steel helmets. The first cost came home before the dead did. In September of 1914, weeks into the war, a mob in Sparkbrook smashed the windows of a German pork butcher named Harry Stiles, looted his shop, and beat him in the street. He had lived in Birmingham for 30 years. After the sinking of the Lusitania in May 1915, the riots came back larger and rolled through Hockley. The enemy, suddenly, was the man who lived next door. The Zeppelins came in January 1916. 3 German airships drifted across the night sky toward what they thought was Liverpool. They were lost. Birmingham executed a complete blackout. Workers at the BSA paused their lines and listened. From the west, where the Black Country lay, they heard the explosions. 35 people killed across the Midlands in a single night. The Zeppelins never found Birmingham itself, but the city understood that the war could now come for it through the sky. Then the PALs went over the top. The 1st of July, 1916, the Battle of the Somme. Between July and October, almost 800 men of the Birmingham PALs were killed. Whole streets in Aston and Small Heath received their telegrams within a single week. The city had recruited friends to die together. The army delivered. In Small Heath that year, a foundryman named Tom Riley worked the Lewis gun lines at the BSA. His wife worked the assembly bench beside him. In a letter preserved in the local archive, he wrote to his mother, "We make the war, and the war makes us." Many of the boys he had played football with did not come back. By 1918, a young widow named Edith Thompson, also a BSA worker, had lost her husband at the Somme. She walked home each night past the same gates that had given her the wage feeding her children and the rifle that buried him. The next calamity was already crossing the Channel.
In 1918, Birmingham recorded 836 deaths per 100,000 from the Spanish influenza.
150% above the city's normal mortality. Hospitals were converted overnight. Midwives, asked to deliver babies in the morning, were drafted in the afternoon to remove bodies from back-to-back houses in borrowed handcarts because the undertakers could not keep up. Edith Thompson lost 2 of her children. She had buried her husband under French mud and her babies under English brick within 18 months. The post-war recession hit Birmingham harder than almost any other British city. By May of 1921, unemployment in the metalworking districts reached around 23%. Workshops in the gun quarter closed by the dozen. Birmingham had built the British Empire's arsenal and had nothing left to do when the Empire stopped buying. Into that desperation, one extraordinary institution kept its doors open. In 1916, Joseph Chamberlain's son, Neville, the steady, less famous brother, had become Lord Mayor of Birmingham. He founded the Birmingham Municipal Bank, the first municipal savings bank in Great Britain, designed to let workers deposit small amounts of cash directly with the city. The most revealing scene of the entire decade happened inside one of those branches. A foundryman in 1920, ragged and unshaven, walked up to the counter and demanded to see his money. The clerk confirmed his balance, £12, 15 shillings and 9 pence. The man did not believe him. The recession had taught him that paper meant nothing. He demanded to see the actual coins. The branch manager opened the counter, walked the foundryman to the back, turned the heavy handle of the safe, and showed him the bags of silver shillings and stacks of treasury notes. The foundryman stared. He nodded. He left. He never withdrew it. He just needed to know it was real. A few miles south, in Longbridge, the same Austin Motor Company that had built aircraft for the Somme launched a small 4-cylinder automobile in 1922. They called it the Austin 7. While Edith Thompson queued for unemployment relief, the Austin 7 rolled out of Longbridge and inaugurated a different city, one that would forget her. In May of 1926, the contradictions exploded. The general strike. For 9 days, almost every transport worker, foundry worker, and engineer in Birmingham walked off the job. 10,000 railwaymen, 6,000 transport workers. The government raided the strike committee's offices and arrested its leaders under emergency sedition laws. The strike collapsed nationally after 9 days, but Birmingham had shown that the working class, which had built the empire, could also stop its trains, its trams, and its furnaces with a single decision. In autumn of 1929, the Council House in Victoria Square still glowed at night. The municipal trams still rumbled. The Elon Valley Aqueduct still carried Welsh mountain water to the foundries of Aston. And 35,000 back-to-back houses still stood. More than 150,000 human beings still lived inside them. 20 years after Joseph Chamberlain had collapsed in his bathroom, his civic gospel had moved Welsh rivers and built international banks, but had not yet emptied the courts of Nechells. The smoke had refused to lift. In Small Heath that autumn, Edith Thompson, the BSA widow, mother of 2 living grandchildren, now 47, still queued at the same yard tap she had carried water from in 1914. She voted Labour in the next election, not from ideology, from rage. Asked years later what she made of the city's reformers, she gave one of the most quoted lines in Birmingham's working-class memory. "They promised us paradise, they gave us a public bath, and left the rest the same." In 1929, the smoke just settled, the red brick stayed, the promise drifted out of focus. Birmingham forged the British Empire. It armed 2 world wars. It invented the municipal bank, the slum clearance scheme, the model factory village. The first cinema still standing in Britain opened on its streets. The first state-sanctioned force-feeding of women in the West happened inside its prison. The Peaky blinders the world knows are a fiction. The real ones were teenage boys with belt buckles, crushed by a chief constable history forgot. And while every other lost city we have rebuilt on this channel was destroyed by fire, water, armies, or plague, Birmingham was destroyed by the one thing it refused to admit. The same red brick that built the empire was suffocating the people inside it.
Birmingham built an empire of steel and smoke, but it slowly lost its people in the shadows.
If you want to see another empire that sacrificed its own roots for power, you have to watch my reconstruction of Kiev. See how a warlord drowned his own gods to build a golden city.
Make sure to subscribe so you never miss a new reconstruction. See you on the next journey.
Before we finish, I want to take a moment to recognize the people appearing on screen right now. To the members of this channel, thank you so much. Your ongoing support is what motivates me and helps keep this project alive. If you enjoy what we do here and would like to directly support the channel, I invite you to click the Join button down below. To our members and to everyone who is simply watching this video, thank you for your time.